Thanks, Moira. Tom Watson is my guest. He has written a book, and here it is, called Man Shoes, The Journey to Becoming a Better Man, Husband, and Father. It seems to me, Tom, that it's really remarkable. We talk about miracles. We're sitting here talking about your book. You know what I mean? Because you were on your way to becoming a statistic. How is it that a child can be in 13 foster homes before he's 5 years of age? How does that happen?
Well, unfortunately, Jim, it happens more often than we think. Yeah. There's 17,000 foster kids put into the foster system here in Canada every year. And most of those kids will go through more foster homes in their foster career than I went through. I was actually very fortunate.
Now, you weren't orphaned, but you were the child of absent or even neglectful parents.
Yeah. My mother and father really didn't stop partying, and so they would just abandon me with my natural aunt for weeks at a time, and then come and pick me up and go off and party again. And so it was just a very unstable situation that finally I had to be taken out of, or I probably wouldn't have made it.
Now, 13 foster homes by the time you're 5. At what point in that 5 years did you become aware of the fact that you were being shunted around?
Oh, I think you get to 3-4 years of age. I got into a very abusive foster home, and one that was really tortured me, and so at that point in your life, you know that you're as a child, you know that you're not loved, you're not wanted.
When you describe that torture in your book, I mean, I was horrified at what you went through. Yeah. I mean, it's got to be traumatic, chasing you around the house, hitting you. Well, I don't want to get into all the stuff that you endured, but I mean, it's just horrible. That's got to have a lasting impact on a kid.
Yeah, just the other day I was saying to my wife, one of the things that would happen is I was expected at 3 years of age to actually wash the dishes, and if I got water on the counter or on the floor, I'd get tortured. And even to this day, just the other, on the weekend, I said to my wife, I have this bad habit of if I see any water on the counter, I still have to go and wipe it up. So it's lasting stuff that only Jesus can help you through, and I've prayed for many years for peace in those areas. Mm.
Now, by God's grace, you were introduced to the Watson family. Mm. Now, your family name was not Watson. It was Plum?
Plum.
Plum,
yeah.
Right, Plum. A remarkable couple. Tell me about them.
Well, it is a remarkable story. The Watsons were an elderly couple when they took me in, heading into their 60s, a retired pastor.
Watch that. Into the 60s, elderly. I take that touch personally. Anyway, carry on. He was a retired pastor.
Retired pastor, yeah. and I ended up on their doorstep with a social services worker, and really was my last opportunity. That week, the social worker had been told, you have to find this boy a home, or he's going to go into a group home. And the Watsons' name popped up on his list, and he dropped me off at this house and had a chat with them. And for some reason, at 60 years of age, when their kids were grown and they were heading into their retirement, they decided that the Lord was calling them to take in this 5-year-old disturbed little boy. And they did. And I lived with them for 13 years in their home. And they really became my mother and father. I to this day think of them as my parents. I took their name when I was 22, and never did get adopted. My birth mother, would never let them adopt me. She would always fight them in court over that. So I was never adopted, but really was treated just like one of their own children. For the duration of their lives.
No, you were not exactly a model child initially.
No.
They showed a lot of patience and wisdom.
A lot of wisdom, a lot of patience, and I needed a miracle. And what God gave me was not just one stay-at-home parent, but 2 stay-at-home parents who had lived a life, who had raised their own children, who had a lot of knowledge, a lot of grace. And Mr. Watson had big Irish fingers that could find their way to the back end of my butt. He always said to me that the fastest way to a disobedient young boy's brain is through his butt. And I found that worked pretty well on several occasions.
But this was different from any physical abuse you had suffered previously.
It was done in love.
It was done in love, and you would know it as a kid.
Yeah. Yeah, it was done in love, and really, never once did he, you know, out of anger, give me a swat. He always used to tell me, "This is going to hurt me more than it hurts you," and I believe it did. Yeah, you know.
How was your adjustment once you got into school? Now you're part of the Watson family. Had they had enough influence on you at that point that you were able to integrate into the school situation, or was it tough for you for a while?
For years, yeah. Years? I was so far behind when I was the only child in Spirit River history to fail kindergarten.
Oh, no, really? That takes some doing.
I didn't know ABCs. I didn't know 1, 2, 3s. I couldn't sit at a desk. I was cutting hair off of the girl in front of me. You know, I was fighting every day in the playground several times a day. I spent more time in the principal's office for years than any child. In fact, they had a seat in the principal's office with my name on it. I was an amazingly disturbed child.
When did things begin to turn around?
I think, you know, progression began early on, but there's such a long ways to go, such a big gap between what's normal and acceptable and where I was at. But grade 5 was my breakout year. I had a teacher, Mrs. Sideroff, who got boys. She, you know, ADD, ADHD, all those acronyms weren't around at that time, but she knew that for sure I was probably ADD, ADHD, and any other acronym you could give us. Yeah. And Mom and Dad Watson worked really well with her. And for the first time that year, I caught up in school. I'd always done grade 1, 2, grade 2, 3, grade 3, 4. I was always on a modified program. And by the end of grade 5, for the first time, I went into grade 6 doing grade 6 work. And actually was somewhat normal on the playground and able to associate with others. And so that was really my big breakout year, I think.
And what about you and yourself? You know, Tom Watson and his view of himself. How did you see yourself in those early days? And then was there a development there as well in terms of your self-view and your self-concept?
Well, I was angry. I was just an angry little boy. I didn't know, I don't really know if I understood how angry I was because I'd always been angry. I think when you go through what I went through, you learn to rely on yourself. And you can only trust yourself, and everybody else is the enemy. And even the Watsons were the enemy. It took me a long time to tell them I loved them. But what I learned as I went along in school and as the years went by was that I was angry, and that there was a lot of hurt and a lot of frustration and a lot of not knowing who I was and where I came from and why didn't people love me and all of this stuff. But Mr. Watson and Mrs. Watson, of course, were strong Christians, and they spoke into my life, and they taught me what family meant. And they brought mentors in from the community. They knew that they weren't going to be able to be everything to me. And they brought really strong mentors, coaches and teachers into my life, family members from other families in the community who they trusted. And they built into my life. And also, by the way, they started to talk to me about the love of Jesus.